I'm Michael Reynolds, 38, and tonight I arrived at my childhood home in Chicago expecting nothing more than a quiet family dinner. The house still held the familiar scent of my mother's cooking mixed with the faint, comforting smell of old leather-bound books from my father's study. It was a place where I'd spent countless evenings growing up, surrounded by laughter and stories, but tonight the air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension I couldn't yet place. As I stepped into the dining room, my sister Emily was already there, her eyes sharp and fixed on me. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, pretending not to notice the tightness in the room, while Dad sat silently at the head of the table, his face unreadable. I tried to catch his eye, but he just nodded slightly, as if warning me to brace myself. We sat down, plates clinking softly as Mom served the food. The conversation started casually, with small talk about work and neighborhood changes, but then Emily's voice cut through the calm like a sudden gust of wind. Michael, we need to talk about the inheritance, she said, her tone flat but firm. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I wasn't prepared for this. The inheritance had always been a distant, abstract thing, a future consideration, never an immediate concern. But now, here it was, thrust into the present like a loaded gun on the table. Emily's eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. I want to share. It's only fair. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the weight of her words settled over us. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. Fair? After everything? I remembered all the times I'd supported her financially, emotionally, and the countless sacrifices I'd made to keep our family afloat. Yet here she was demanding a piece of what I'd worked hard for, as if entitlement was her birthright. Mom cleared her throat, attempting to smooth the sudden rift. Emily, maybe tonight isn't the best time for this discussion. We should all be enjoying dinner. But Emily was relentless. No, Mom, it's time. Michael's always been the one with everything, and now it's time he shares. I'm tired of feeling left out. I watched as Dad shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. I sensed the unspoken history between him and Emily, a history I barely understood, but that now seemed to fuel her boldness. The dinner table, once a place of comfort and connection, had become a battleground. I thought back to the years I'd lent her money to cover rent when she lost her job, the nights I stayed up helping her through personal crises, the times I bailed her out of bad decisions without complaint. I never asked for repayment or recognition, believing family meant unconditional support. But now, the lines were blurred, and I felt the sting of betrayal. Emily's voice pulled me back. You don't get to act like you're the only one who matters. We're family, Michael. That means sharing everything, including what you'll inherit. Her words echoed in my mind, mixing with a simmering frustration I struggled to contain. I wanted to speak, to explain, to remind her of the years of support I'd given, but the tension in the room made it difficult. Instead, I took a slow breath and met her gaze steadily. I understand where you're coming from, Emily, I said carefully. But inheritance isn't just about sharing, it's about honoring the wishes of those who worked hard to leave something behind. It's not a currency for entitlement. Her eyes narrowed. So you're just going to keep it all for yourself after everything? I hesitated. The weight of her accusation was heavy, but it was also a moment of clarity. I realized this was about more than money. It was about respect, fairness, and the complicated history we shared. Mom tried again to intervene, her voice softer this time. Let's not let this ruin the evening. We can discuss it later, calmly. But the damage was done. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by a charged silence that filled every corner of the room. I looked around at the faces I'd known all my life, their expressions, a mix of discomfort, expectation, and something I couldn't quite name. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The inheritance was no longer a distant concept, it was a looming conflict that threatened to unravel the family ties I'd always taken for granted. I wondered how we had reached this point where love and loyalty were overshadowed by demands and grievances. Later, in my old bedroom, now cluttered with boxes from when I moved back temporarily, I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the evening in my mind. The walls were lined with faded posters and photographs, snapshots of younger days when our biggest worries were school and summer vacations. I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with sadness. What had changed so drastically? My phone buzzed. It was David, my closest friend since college, who always had a way of cutting through the noise. I hesitated but answered. Hey, Michael, how was the family dinner? His voice was casual but tinged with concern. Complicated, I admitted. Emily brought up the inheritance out of nowhere. She wants a share, and it turned the whole night sour. There was a pause on the other end. That's rough. She's always had a sense of entitlement, but still, it's your money and your decision. You've got to stand your ground. I want to, I said, running a hand through my hair, but it's not just about the money. It's about years of support I gave her, and now she acts like I owe her everything. It feels like betrayal. David sighed. Family dynamics are messy, but remember, you have your legal rights, and if you've prepared things properly, you can protect yourself. Don't let guilt or pressure make you give up what's yours. His words brought some comfort, but also a reminder that this was only the beginning. I knew I needed to face this head on to clarify my position and protect what mattered. But more than that, I needed to understand why Emily had changed so much, why the sister I'd known was now making demands that threatened to tear us apart. As I hung up, I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, the city lights twinkling like distant promises. This was a turning point not just for the inheritance, but for my family and me. The peaceful dinners of the past were gone, replaced by a new reality where boundaries would be tested and difficult conversations were inevitable. I resolved to prepare myself both emotionally and legally. I had to face Emily's demands, but I wouldn't let them define me or dictate my future. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to take control of my legacy on my terms. Tomorrow, I'd begin by reviewing my will and speaking with my attorney. Tonight, I would try to rest, though the weight of the evening's confrontation pressed heavily on my mind. Family had always been my foundation, but now it felt like the ground was shifting beneath me and I needed to find solid footing before everything collapsed. The morning after that strained dinner, I couldn't shake the heaviness that settled over me like a thick fog. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, replaying Emily's demand over and over in my mind. It wasn't just the words she'd said, it was everything beneath them. The sense of entitlement, the years I'd supported her while she acted like I owed her, the unspoken resentment that now hung between us like a thick curtain. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up on the phone, listening to her troubles, offering advice and sometimes money when she was between jobs or facing unexpected bills. I'd never asked for anything in return because family was supposed to be unconditional, but now that unconditional support felt like a one-way street. And tonight, Emily was demanding a share of my inheritance, as if my past kindness was a debt she was finally cashing in. I reached for my phone and called David. He'd been my rock through thick and thin, the one voice I trusted to help me sort through the chaos. When he answered, I could tell something was off. His tone was serious, not the usual easygoing banter we shared. "Michael, you sound tense. What happened?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "It's Emily. At dinner last night, she surprised me with a demand for a share of the inheritance. Just out of the blue. It caught me off guard." There was a pause. "That's a bold move. Has she always been like this?" "Not exactly," I said, swirling the cold coffee in my mug. "She's always had moments of entitlement, but this feels different, like she's crossing a line. I helped her through so much financially, emotionally, and now she's acting like I owe her." David sighed. "Sounds like she's been taking advantage of your generosity for a long time. It's hard to confront that when it's family, but you have to protect yourself." "I want to," I said quietly, "but it's complicated. I don't want to become the bad guy. I don't want to lose her or the rest of the family over this." He was silent for a moment, then said firmly, "Sometimes standing up for yourself means making tough choices. You've got legal protections in place, right? A will, trusts, that kind of thing?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, I've prepared a will. It's been updated within the last year. I made sure everything was clear, but I haven't talked about it with anyone. I guess I was hoping to avoid this kind of confrontation." David's voice softened. "It's good you have it set up, Michael. That's your safeguard. You don't have to give in to demands just because they come from family. You're allowed to protect what's yours." His words gave me a measure of comfort, but the knot in my chest tightened. I realized how much I'd internalized the idea that family meant sacrifice without boundaries, that my generosity was an expectation, not a choice. After the call, I opened my laptop and pulled up the document of my will. Reading through it, I felt a mix of relief and resolve. The will clearly outlined the distribution of my assets, specifying who would inherit what. I saw that I had explicitly excluded any forced sharing or claims that weren't authorized. It was a legal shield, a boundary I'd drawn to protect myself and my legacy. But even with the paperwork in place, the emotional battle felt far from over. Emily's demand had stirred up a complicated stew of feelings: betrayal, frustration, sadness, and I knew I needed to prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. Later that afternoon, I met David for a walk in the park. The fresh air and the crunch of leaves underfoot helped clear my head. I shared with him memories of the times I'd helped Emily, the late night calls, the financial bailouts. I just keep thinking, I said, how I never expected this from her. I thought family was supposed to be about support, not demands. David nodded thoughtfully. It's painful when people you care about forget that, but sometimes people see generosity as weakness or entitlement. They forget the cost to the giver. I looked up at the gray sky, feeling the weight of his words. I don't want to play the victim, but I also don't want to be taken advantage of anymore. I have to find a way to stand firm without burning bridges. That's the balance you have to strike, David said. Clear boundaries, but open communication, and don't be afraid to seek legal advice if things get messy. His encouragement sparked a plan in my mind. I would meet with my attorney, review my documents, and make sure everything was airtight. But beyond that, I would have to prepare emotionally to face Emily's demands head on and assert my rights without losing myself in the process. That evening, I called my attorney, Lisa, who had helped me draft my will. She was calm and reassuring as I explained the situation. Michael, it sounds like you've done the right thing by preparing your will carefully, she said. I can review it with you again and discuss any additional measures you might want to take to protect your interests. It's important to be proactive. I felt a surge of gratitude. Having a professional in my corner made the challenge feel more manageable. Also, Lisa added, if Emily or any family members try to contest the will or pressure you, there are legal ways to handle that. You don't have to face this alone. Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. I scheduled a meeting for the next day to go over everything in detail. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with memories of Emily's past struggles, the help I'd given, and the growing distance between us. I realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about respect and recognition. I needed her to understand that my support had boundaries and that inheritance wasn't a birthright to be claimed on a whim. I thought about our parents too, how they had always tried to keep peace by avoiding tough conversations, hoping time would smooth over the cracks, but time hadn't healed anything. If anything, it had allowed resentments to fester beneath the surface. I decided that when the time came, I would face Emily calmly but firmly. I wouldn't let guilt or family pressure dictate my decisions. This was my legacy, my future, and I had the right to protect it. The next morning, I woke with a sense of determination. I drafted a list of points I wanted to cover with Lisa, clarifying the will's provisions, exploring options to prevent forced sharing, and understanding the legal recourse available if Emily challenged the arrangements. I also thought about reaching out to Emily directly. Maybe a conversation could clear the air, or at least set boundaries before things escalated. But I knew I had to be careful not to inflame tensions, but to stand my ground. As I made my way to Lisa's office, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and resolve. This was more than a legal matter. It was a turning point in my family's story and in my own journey towards self-respect. David's words echoed in my mind: protect yourself, stand firm, but don't lose sight of who you are. I was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. I found myself standing in the living room of the house where I'd grown up, the same place where Emily had first thrown her demand at me just days before. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just a legal discussion. It was a battle for the respect and boundaries I'd spent years trying to maintain. Emily was already there when I arrived, her expression guarded but defiant. Mom hovered nearby, her eyes flickering between us with a mixture of hope and worry. Dad sat in his usual chair, quiet but attentive. The room felt thick with anticipation. I took a deep breath and looked Emily in the eye. Emily, I want to talk about what you said the other night about the inheritance. She crossed her arms, her jaw tight. Good, because I'm not backing down. I nodded, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I've prepared for this. I have a will that clearly outlines how my assets will be distributed. It's not up for negotiation or forced sharing. Emily's eyes flashed with anger. So you're just going to keep it all for yourself? After all the years I've struggled and you've had everything handed to you? I felt the sting of her words but refused to let them shake me. You know that's not true, Emily. I've supported you through difficult times financially and emotionally without ever asking for anything in return. But inheritance isn't a debt you can demand to be paid, it's a legacy, and I have the right to decide how it's distributed. Her face twisted with frustration. You don't get to decide who gets what when it's family. That's not fair. I disagree, I said firmly. Fairness isn't about entitlement, it's about honoring the wishes laid out in legal documents and respecting the intentions behind them. I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to protect myself and my future. Mom stepped in, her voice trembling. Michael, maybe you're being too harsh. We're family. Shouldn't we find a way to share? I shook my head gently. Mom, this isn't about being harsh. It's about boundaries. If I give in now, it sets a precedent that I can be pressured into giving up what I've worked for. That's not a healthy dynamic. Emily's eyes softened for a moment, but her resolve remained. So, what now? You're just going to shut me out? No, I said. I want us to have a relationship that's based on respect and honesty, not on demands and resentment. But I need you to understand that this inheritance isn't a bargaining chip. The room grew quiet. Dad finally spoke, his voice low but steady. Michael's right. The will is clear. We've all known it's his decision. Emily looked away, struggling with the reality of the situation. I could see the conflict in her eyes, hurt, frustration, maybe even regret. But I also sensed a chasm growing between us that wouldn't be bridged by words alone. I took a step closer, trying to soften the moment. Emily, I'm not closing the door on us, but I have to protect myself. I hope over time we can rebuild trust and understanding. She nodded slowly, but the tension lingered. After the conversation, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Standing firm had been necessary, but it had also deepened the divide. I knew this was a turning point, not just legally, but personally. Later that week, I met with Lisa again to finalize the details of my will and discuss any additional steps to fortify my position. She reassured me that the documents were solid and that my rights were well protected. Michael, she said, you've done everything right. If anyone tries to challenge the will, we'll handle it. But the most important thing is your clarity and resolve. You're setting boundaries, and that's crucial. Her words echoed what David had told me earlier. I realized that asserting my rights wasn't about being selfish, it was about self-respect. Back home, I received a message from Emily. It was brief, almost tentative. Can we talk? I debated responding immediately, but chose to wait until I felt ready to approach the conversation with calm and clarity. I didn't want to be drawn into another emotional tug of war. Instead, I reached out to David. I stood my ground today, I told him. It was hard, but necessary. He smiled through the phone. He reminded me that family conflicts like this rarely resolved overnight. They required patience, boundaries, and sometimes distance. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts. Mom called more often, trying to smooth things over. Dad remained quiet but supportive. Emily's messages were sporadic and guarded. I kept focusing on my work and my legal preparations, determined not to let the conflict consume me. One afternoon, Emily showed up at my office unannounced. I felt my pulse quicken as I let her in. I want to understand, Michael, she said quietly. Why are you so firm? Why can't we share? I looked at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath the anger. Because Emily, sharing isn't about splitting assets evenly. It's about respect for boundaries and fairness. I've supported you beyond what's expected, but inheritance is different. It's my choice. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I guess I never saw it that way. I hope someday you will, I said gently, but for now, I need you to respect my decision. She left shortly after, and though the tension hadn't vanished, a door had opened, a fragile hope for reconciliation built on honesty. That night, I felt a quiet strength within me. I had faced the hardest part, the confrontation, and stood firm without losing myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I was reclaiming my voice, my rights, and my future. After the confrontation with Emily, I knew I had to take concrete steps to protect myself legally and emotionally. The conversation had been intense, but it left me with clarity, a clarity I needed to translate into action. So, the next day, I met with Lisa again. This time, we went over every detail of my will, making sure everything was airtight. Lisa was meticulous, pointing out clauses and contingencies I hadn't fully considered. Michael, these additions will reinforce your decisions and make it much harder for anyone to challenge the will, she explained, her tone professional yet reassuring. We can also set up trust to manage the assets more effectively, limiting access and ensuring the terms are followed precisely. I listened carefully, grateful for her guidance. The thought of having layers of protection gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt before. It was more than just paperwork, it was a shield against future conflicts, a way to assert control over my own legacy. After finalizing the documents, I returned home feeling a mix of relief and lingering sadness. The family dynamics had shifted, and despite my efforts, the distance between Emily and me remained palpable. I knew that no legal document could mend the emotional fractures overnight. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed with messages from family members trying to bridge the gap. Mom sent texts filled with gentle reminders of love and the hope that we could find common ground. Dad called less often, but left voicemails expressing his desire for peace. I was cautious in my responses, mindful not to reopen wounds or make promises I wasn't ready to keep. I replied with measured kindness, acknowledging their feelings but maintaining the boundaries I'd set. Then came an unexpected invitation. Emily reached out asking if I would attend a family gathering to celebrate Mom and Dad's anniversary. It was a milestone event, and I sensed it was an olive branch. I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to avoid the potential tension. Another part longed for the normalcy we'd lost. After some reflection, I decided to attend, but with clear intentions to be present without sacrificing my boundaries. The evening arrived, and the house was filled with familiar faces, laughter, and the warm glow of candles. For a moment, it felt like the past, the family I remembered, before the conflicts and demands. Emily approached me quietly during the gathering. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. "I know things have been rough." I nodded. "I want us to find a way forward, Emily, but it has to be with respect for all of us." She smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'm willing to try." Throughout the night, conversations were tentative but genuine. We shared stories, reminisced about childhood memories, and cautiously navigated the new landscape of our relationship. Despite the warmth, I remained aware of the fragile balance. I wasn't ready to erase the boundaries I'd set, but I was open to rebuilding trust slowly, step by step. In the weeks that followed, I continued to receive messages from Emily and other family members, some apologetic, others hopeful. I listened, responded thoughtfully, and kept my focus on protecting my future while nurturing the possibility of reconciliation. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle shifts in how Emily interacted not just with me, but with others. She seemed more reflective, less demanding, as if she was beginning to understand the consequences of her previous actions. One afternoon, Megan, my aunt, reached out. She had always been a quiet observer, offering support without judgment. During our call, she shared insights about the strain the family was under and how my firm stance had prompted some much-needed reflection. Megan said that Samantha and others are realizing how much they relied on you. I told David during one of our conversations, "It's like my refusal to give in forced them to face their own responsibilities." David nodded. "Sometimes boundaries are the catalyst for growth, not just for you, but for the whole family." I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that my actions had consequences beyond my own life. It wasn't just about protecting assets. It was about encouraging accountability and respect. Yet, I remained vigilant. I knew that old patterns could resurface if I let my guard down. The legal protections Lisa helped me establish remained a safety net, and I maintained clear communication with my attorney to stay prepared. As the months passed, I found a new rhythm. The tension with Emily eased, replaced by cautious cooperation. Family gatherings became more bearable, even enjoyable at times, though the wounds of the past were still healing. I also noticed changes in myself. Standing firm had strengthened my sense of self-worth and autonomy. I no longer felt guilty for asserting my rights or for saying no when necessary. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Emily. She wanted to talk about a potential collaboration on a small business idea she had. It was a sign of progress, a tentative step toward rebuilding trust and partnership. I listened carefully, weighing the risks and possibilities. It was clear that our relationship was evolving, not perfect, but moving forward. Through it all, I held on to the lessons I'd learned. That self-respect requires boundaries, that protecting oneself isn't selfish, and that family dynamics are complex and ever-changing. I realized that while I couldn't control others' actions, I could control how I responded. And in doing so, I was shaping not only my legacy, but also the future of my family. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine to navigate. And with each step, I grew stronger, more confident, and more determined to live life on my own terms. Months have passed since the stormy confrontation with Emily, and I've had time to reflect on everything that unfolded. The journey has been difficult, marked by painful realizations and hard-won boundaries, but it was necessary. Standing up for myself was the toughest choice I ever had to make, but also the most empowering. I've learned that self-respect isn't something that happens by accident. It's a deliberate act of courage. When Emily demanded a share of my inheritance, it wasn't just about money. It was about years of support that went unnoticed, about my right to decide my own future without being coerced. I had to face the uncomfortable truth that generosity can be mistaken for weakness and that sometimes protecting yourself means saying no to those you love. Sitting here now, I realize that the experience reshaped not just my relationship with Emily, but my entire outlook on family and boundaries. I've come to understand that family isn't always easy or fair, but it doesn't have to mean sacrificing your own needs to keep the peace. True love and respect require honesty, accountability, and sometimes tough conversations. As I look back, I see how asserting my boundaries strengthened my integrity. I'm no longer the person who quietly absorbed demands or felt guilty for protecting what's mine. Instead, I'm someone who values fairness and expects the same from those around me. The legal steps I took, updating my will, consulting with my attorney, establishing trust, were more than paperwork. They were declarations of my autonomy, tools that let me take control of my own legacy. Knowing that my wishes are clear and protected gives me peace I hadn't known before. Family gatherings have changed too. While they're not perfect and the scars of past conflicts still linger, there's a new respect in the air. Emily and I are learning to communicate differently, cautiously rebuilding trust without ignoring the lessons we've learned. It's a slow process, but it's progress. I share my story not because I want sympathy, but because I want others to know they're not alone. Many people face similar struggles when family members make unreasonable demands. When boundaries are tested, when generosity is taken for granted, it's easy to feel isolated, overwhelmed, or guilty. But standing up for yourself is not betrayal, it's self-preservation. Protecting your interests doesn't mean you love less, it means you value yourself enough to insist on fairness. Inheritance, legacy, and family dynamics are deeply personal, and you have the right to decide what's best for you. To anyone listening, I encourage you to claim your worth. Don't let guilt or pressure dictate your choices. Seek support from trusted friends, professionals, or legal advisors if needed. Prepare yourself emotionally and practically. And remember that boundaries are acts of love, love for yourself, and ultimately for those around you. My experience taught me that reclaiming your life from toxic demands is transformative. It's not easy, but it's necessary for growth and healing. I am grateful for the strength I found in myself, for the clarity that came from confrontation, and for the possibility of healthier relationships moving forward. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonates with you, please share your thoughts below and consider subscribing for more stories about resilience, self-respect, and navigating life's toughest challenges. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.